All right, so I'm going to talk about this about 2 years ago, is where I'm going to start on this next part of the story. So, about 2 years ago, my son started complaining about having upper right quadrant pain. And like I said, I am a nurse, and my husband has a strong medical background as well. And we both agreed that this is probably a bad gallbladder. It sounded like a gallbladder. He was having trouble eating. When he did eat, it would hurt worse, which is typical for a gallbladder attack. We encouraged him to go to the doctor, and he did. He went to see a doctor. This was right after the whole, COVID thing. So it was actually towards the end of it. So he still couldn't go in and see a doctor physically. Everything was done via the phone, which isn't always the best. They ran a bunch of labs. They didn't see anything. They did encourage him to go get an ultrasound on his stomach to see if his gallbladder was bad, because they agreed that it sounded like a gallbladder and he was having gallbladder attacks. That never happened. I don't know if he lost his insurance or what, but it never happened. But he continued to get worse. He got where he couldn't even eat anymore. And he was going days on end with barely eating any food, or making one meal last all day. He was sleeping all the time, and he admits that he was actually consuming more alcohol to help him get to sleep. So, again, was he an alcoholic? I don't know. But he does admit that he was sometimes, doing up to a pint of vodka at night to help him sleep. And it was getting worse. Well, one night he was getting particularly worse. He said that we had noticed he wasn't feeling good. He was getting irritable when we went to see him. He just couldn't eat anymore. He didn't look good. He was dropping weight in a strange way. He literally had no energy whatsoever. And so one night he said that he kept waking up and the pain wasn't going away. How normally he could put himself to sleep with some vodka, he wasn't working, and he kept drinking more and more, thinking he could go back to sleep, and yet he was paralyzed and in a fetal position almost, trying to make it through the night. He finally ended up calling 911 after he'd finished his pint of vodka and then noticed it wasn't helping anymore. He called 911 and had himself taken in. When we got in there, he was already getting admitted into the hospital, and which made no sense. I mean, they knew by that time they knew it was his gallbladder. They had done actually a CAT scan and seen that his gallbladder was bad. But the other thing the CAT scan showed was that he had small kidneys, and that they were diagnosed as little, and his creatinine was extremely elevated, which is one of the labs that they notice for people in kidney disease. And mind you, it could be acute kidney disease or chronic. They didn't know at that point. They just knew that his creatinine looked bad. And that was actually his reason for being admitted. Also, his blood pressure was high, which is pretty typical of someone who's in kidney disease. A high blood, it's always what caused the high blood pressure. Was it is it the kidney disease causing the high blood pressure? Is it the high blood pressure that destroyed the kidneys? Or was it the gallbladder? We don't know at this point. We'll never know, probably. I mean, and it's that way with multiple patients. But high blood pressure is known to cause kidney failure. And kidneys actually can, I believe, help raise blood pressure. They kind of go hand in hand. So when he was in the hospital, he did get his gallbladder out emergently. And lo and behold, I think 7 days later, they were able to get his blood pressure under control. The doctor then informed us that he needed to have a catheter placed and start getting dialysis. And they couldn't tell us at that point if this was acute or chronic. They just said that he's going to have dialysis. We had hopes that it was acute because one of the things that happens with kidney failure is your potassium goes high. Potassium and phosphorus and sodium all go high because those are claimed by the kidneys. And also, often kidney patients don't pee much. They can. Don't get me wrong. Kidney patients can pee, and especially in the beginning, they can pee just like everyone else. And as a matter of fact, that's the one thing about Stiles is he peed really well. He never stopped peeing. As a matter of fact, the moment they got his blood pressure more under control, he peed better than ever. He also his potassium was low and his sodium was low, which was really odd. But I think they attributed that to the amount of alcohol he had in his system over the past few months that, and alcohol does do that, it strips your electrolytes out. So I think they were thinking that that played a little part of this critically low potassium. And for anybody that knows potassium levels, his was 2, which is a critically low number, especially for someone who's having kidney issues. It didn't make a lot of sense. So, we had hopes that all this meant that he was just in acute failure and that he, after a couple of, some fluid or some dialysis, he would do great. Well, his pressures were so high that quickly stopped the fluid because if often when people are in acute failure, it's dehydration, so they'll flush them full of fluid. And also when people are detoxing off alcohol, they like to flush them full of fluid too to wash all this stuff out. With him, they didn't want to do that because his pressures were too high. He couldn't sustain that large amount of fluid in him. So that was stopped. And it didn't seem to be helping his numbers. So we had hopes then for the dialysis. His numbers did improve with dialysis, but they weren't significant. It was what you would expect to see with someone having dialysis, that numbers got better, but not healed better, not it's all over with better, just better. That left us kind of worried about where we were headed.